All right. Hello, everyone. I gave the 5-minute Zoom grace period, so we're going to go ahead and get started so we can remain on time. So I'm reporting live here from California, so it is 5:05 PST. But I want to welcome you all to Candid Conversations, Volume 2. So this is frequently asked questions. This is our succeeding program following Candid Conversations, Volume 1. My name is Dr. Jacinda Abdul-Mutakabir, and I am currently an ambassador for Pharmacy Initiative Leaders, or PILS. I'm going to take this time to ask you all to follow us on all social media platforms at PILS Connect. The PILS purpose is to magnify underrepresented minorities in the profession of pharmacy. The PILS culture is one of leadership, authenticity, vision, innovation, as well as diversity and inclusion. So to give you all a bit of background about me, once again, my name is Dr. Jacinda Abdul-Mutakabir, and I'll be hosting tonight our Candid Conversations Volume 2. I went to the Howard University, home of Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, for where I obtained my undergraduate degree. I went to the University of St. Joseph in Connecticut, where I graduated with my doctorate degree in pharmacy. I went back to Howard because you don't get much better than Black people, where I completed my PGY1 residency. And then I went to Wayne State University, where I did an infectious diseases research fellowship, as well as a master's in public health in Detroit, Michigan, where I am from. So I am honored to be you all's host for Candid Conversations Volume 2. And then we're gonna briefly talk about what we discussed in Candid Conversations Volume 1. So we went through and we talked about previous pandemics, and we had Dr. Maxim and Dr. Sumiyu kind of give us some background on previous pandemics and how we know and what we know from previous pandemics to guide us through COVID-19. We talked about vaccine development, and Dr. Dio and Dr. Christian gave us wonderful explanations on the vaccine development process. We talked about the Tuskegee syphilis study and how that relates and transpires into institutional distrust with the COVID-19 vaccine. And finally, we wrapped it up with some pharmacology. So we just talked about some science in regards to the COVID-19 vaccines. So today we are going to answer those questions that were not answered during our previous conversation because it was so robust. So we're going to launch right into those today. I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists and our conversationals, as I like to call it, introduce themselves in just a second, but I do want to handle a bit of housekeeping. So with that being said, housekeeping rules, the chat as well as the chat feature as well as the mic feature will be turned off until we are able to make it through our own frequently asked questions, as to not deter us or in any way impede on the answers that we provide to you all during this first half of programming. I will then cue the people behind the curtain to unmute the mic and let you all ask questions or ask questions via the chat. So hold tight and make sure that you listen well, because your question may very well be answered as we go through these FAQs. And I would like to start this off as people introduce themselves with stating that I did receive the COVID-19 vaccine, the complete series. Following our last conversation, I received dose 1 and then I received dose 2. I myself received the Pfizer vaccine. I performed well. I feel like I unfortunately did not get any superpowers. I am still completely me, and my mRNA is now no longer present. But yeah, I'm excited to be vaccinated. I feel safer having been vaccinated, and I'm excited to protect not only myself, but those around me. So I'll start with you, Dr. Christian. Take it away with introductions.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I am Robbie Christian. I am an infectious diseases pharmacist at Our Lady of the Lake Regional Medical Center in Louisiana, but born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I completed my first year residency at the Miami VA, and then I went on to Cleveland and completed my second year for infectious diseases at the Cleveland VA. Before we did our last talk, I was planning to get the COVID vaccine on January 4th. Unfortunately, your girl got sick on December 30th and got COVID, and I plan to get the vaccine around March now to start that series off. All right, next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yawande Dayo, and I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with everyone. I'm currently ID pharmacist working with the Osher healthcare system in New Orleans, Louisiana. They actually spread around the state, actually. And I did my first year of training, which was more of a general clinical training at the VA in Washington, D.C. I then went on to do my second year of training where I was specialized in infectious diseases at the Houston VA. And since then, I have been working as an ID pharmacist since I graduated essentially from my training program. I'm excited to say I did get the vaccine. I got my second dose about a week and a half ago. And it's been really great just being able to be there present for my patients without the fear of getting sick and being kind of taken out of commission. So that's exciting.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Maxim. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. Did my undergrad training at the University of Georgia. I went on to get my pharmacy degree from the Medical University of South Carolina, MUSC, in Charleston, South Carolina. I did my PGY1 general residency at Wake Forest Baptist Health in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I did my PGY2 NID at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I've been an infectious disease clinical pharmacist at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, Florida since August of 2019. I received my second dose of the Pfizer vaccine January 6th. And I actually am fresh off of working the COVID clinic today to help vaccinate more patients. So I'm super excited to be here and excited to share some knowledge.
Okay, and my name is Brenda Sumiyu. I did my pharmacy school at Wingate University. I then went on to do a PGY1 at Jackson Hospital and Clinic in Montgomery, Alabama. Did a PGY2 at the Carilion Clinic in Virginia. And then I recently just moved to New Orleans, and I currently work as an ID pharmacist at West Jefferson Medical Center. I too also have I also completed the vaccine series, I believe, in January 4th. And just like Jacinda said, I still have, I am still me, no superpowers.
All right, so sounds good. We have cleared it up. Nobody got any superpowers. So, and Robbie's gonna get her vaccine in March. So we're gonna go ahead and launch right into these FAQs so that we can leave time for some additional questions. So Dr. Dayo, this first question will be for you. So we just wanna ask, how frequently should this vaccine be taken?
Thanks for that question, Jacinda. Unfortunately, we do not know for sure how frequently this vaccine is going to be needed. We do know that more than likely, this is going to be something where we will have to get repeat kind of like booster doses. When that timeline is, we don't know. But what we can say for now is we've had about 8 months worth of data where we have given the vaccine to people who have completed both doses. And so far, no one has had to go and get a booster after 8 months. So it's definitely going to be longer than 8 months, but 8 months, 1 year, 2 years, we're not sure. And that's something that the drug companies, both Pfizer and Moderna, they are collecting data on that to kind of assess essentially when do those antibodies kind of decrease to the point where you're now liable or susceptible again to be infected. That would be the time, or right before then would be the time when we would want to get another shot.
Beautiful. Understood, agreed, and as you said, that's something that we're waiting to get information on. So, Dr. Christian, this question is going to be for you. Will it be required for reopening schools? So, will the COVID-19 vaccine be required for schools reopening? And in the event that they are required, what will the rollout look like? And for different school districts, do you by any chance have any information about the rollout for educators or students, things of that sort?
Great question. So at this time, no, as you probably know already from if you have kids or family that are attending schools, schools have started reopening. So at this time, they are not requiring vaccinations of children. Also, the studies didn't include children in the study, so we're not able to say that they or require that they will be able to get those. However, the CDC does have some set considerations for schools when they are going to open in our communities, how they can open safely, with an emphasis on really protecting our students, protecting our teachers, and any other staff. It is a really good document that they have on the CDC website where the schools have a checklist of the things that they should do. If a kid was to get sick, how long they should quarantine that child or student, and ways to prevent spread and try to keep social distance as much as possible in the school system. A lot of the schools have adapted to a virtual versus in-school method. And depending on the state you're from, there may be more in classes that are required versus a lot of more schools will have some virtual classes that are required. So I'm going to take you to the next slide that shows a picture of a diagram of the US and the different states and what they are requiring right now. Just to let you know, this is fluid. It can change at any time. But so just to orient you to this is going to show different colors that are corresponding to whether there's an order in place by government to require the school to stay open, to have some schools to have what they call partial closing, or schools that have to stay fully open. So the yellow or orange color, it represents our states that do not have an order currently. And I can make sure I drop this link in the chat box once it opens, so you're able to hover over this state to see what your specific requirements are and any particular facts that you may want to know. But the burgundy one at the very bottom, so this one has a closure in effect. This is Puerto Rico. And since September, they have been closed, and they're closed until further notice. So everything is virtual for them. Some of the students will have to do things virtual. We don't know really how long, but again, that will be updated. The red states that you see are partial closures. So if they can't have virtual classes, sometimes what they're usually doing is like they'll have kids in school for a week in class, and then they'll be virtual for a set amount of other days, but there is a virtual component in that. The states that are red are Hawaii, New Mexico, California, West Virginia, Delaware, and District of Columbia. And I know someone asked specifically about DC. So there's about 93,000 students who are enrolled in school. And because they're the virtual type setup, there's about 80% of students who are doing distance learning now versus the 15,000 students who are able to go to class. So states are ordered to remain open all the time are the purple ones. So we have Iowa, Arkansas, Texas, and Florida. So our good states are saying they must remain open 5 days a week for the students, and the students have to be able to go and eat their school lunches and be there to learn further. So again, it's different for different states, but the answer is no. Right now, vaccines are not being required for those students, but I'm sure the rollout will be implemented in that CDC guidance document that all of the schools have, and have been working with their local and state governments to make sure that they are implementing things correctly. So thank you for that question.
It's not a Zoom if you're not talking while on mute. But to also add to what Dr. Christian stated, I know that in California, in certain counties, they have now opened up the vaccine to educators. So like Dr. Christian stated, the information that's provided in terms of when these specific vaccines will be available to certain essential work groups is very fluid, meaning I would honestly check every hour if you have the capacity to do that, because that is something that's rapidly evolving. As more vaccines are allocated to certain areas, more vaccines are being able to be given to different work groups. So I will say that. So Dr. Christian, we have an additional question for you. Are there further studies on the COVID-19 vaccine? And will those studies monitor for more side effects as well as give us more data in regard to the vaccines?
Okay, yes. So when I think of this question, I think of people thinking more about safety. So I'll answer it in 3 different ways. So the first thing I think of is there's already been 42 million doses that have been given of this vaccine, which is amazing. And one piece of information that I think you should take with you is that everyone who has the vaccine does have access to VSafe, which is the first link at the very top or the first diagram. And VSafe is an application that really tracks how you're feeling after you receive that vaccine. So they text you every day, how you're doing, what symptoms do you have, if you have any. You're able to respond to the app or respond via text message if you don't have an app, but it is still able to link you. And if you have any significant reactions, you can state that you wanted someone to contact you, and someone may be able to contact you. So the CDC developed this specifically for COVID because there's, like I said, 42 million doses already given, and they want to be able to track that data real time. So that having the ability to see what's going on with the vaccine right now gives us a glimpse of really what's happening to the people who are being vaccinated, which is really great. The other thing is at the very bottom, you see VAERS. So VAERS is our vaccine adverse event reporting system that has been established for years. So this is for all vaccines that have been given to patients. If you have any reactions to those vaccines, you will let your provider know who gave you the vaccine, and then they'll be able to report it to VAERS and let them know if there's any serious side effects going on, which is also good because if there's a lot of side effects and the benefit is now not outweighing the risk, so it's worse than it is better, that vaccine could be removed and some more research can go into why people are having these reactions and things like that. The next slide is a way to answer the question if you're talking about the vaccines that have already been given. So our Mrna vaccine as well as our Pfizer vaccines have been rolled out, but they do not have FDA approval. So if you recall from the last discussion we had, the emergency use authorization was extended to both of these companies or manufacturers because we're in a state of emergency where COVID has taken lives every single day. But in their emergency use authorization, they had to put in reasoning and ways that they will include any deaths that they get, follow up for safety, hospitalizations, any serious adverse effects has to be reported. And again, if that risk is outweighing the benefit, it will be removed like it was for hydroxychloroquine. And the FDA also expects these manufacturers to go along and continue to try to get FDA approval. So in that, there is, with FDA approval, there's also post-marketing studies where they have to continue to look at the safety in the community and make sure that patients are benefiting from this and not having any really horrible outcomes. So yes, there is a lot of data, and briefly, I'll just take you to the next slide to talk about a few other vaccines that are being looked at right now. So these are not the mRNA vaccines, and I know Jacinda's going to talk a little bit about the mRNA vaccines like we did before, but I just want to just get your ears to this. There are other vaccines in development right now that are in phase 2 and 3. We talked about the different phases, so they're still seeing safety right now, and then it's going to roll out to efficacy, and some of these things have been published. However, these are now the adenovirus and vector, or some of the inactivated viruses. So these are some things that you can look for in the future. And once the rollout starts to happen and people start to get vaccines, you may actually be a person in line to get one of these vaccines. But don't worry, we can still go through the data for those. But I just wanted you to know that there's still vaccines that are in the making, and we'll have a lot of opportunities to really research those. So a lot of studies are still ongoing. They're still researching things. They're not just leaving us where we are. So don't worry about that. Like, this is really, I think, one of the best vaccine study rollouts that I've ever seen, definitely, in my few years of practicing. So they have the spotlight on them, and they'll make sure that we're doing the right thing by our patients and our communities.
Absolutely, 100%. So Dr. Dio, a question for you. If you are feeling sick, should you get the vaccine?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think what we've started seeing as we are rolling out these vaccines and giving it to patients is there's so many kind of situations that come up where we have to come up with a way to address it. And one of them is, if a patient shows up and they tell you that they're feeling sick, should you give them the vaccine or should you not give them the vaccine? The CDC guidance right now essentially states that for patients who seem sick, and the reason why the symptoms are very generic, and you could be sick with COVID, you might not be sick with COVID. It depends on if you're able to get a test, but the symptoms for COVID do look sometimes like some other things. So sometimes if there's no test available, we may not know if you have COVID. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. The guidance is essentially you quarantine for about 10 days. So you want to wait about 10 days until your symptoms kind of are better. And within that 10-day period, at least 24 hours with no fever. Before you are able to go ahead and get the vaccine. So the way I think about this, and I think the easiest way to kind of like approach it is, if you feel sick, try to push your vaccine date. And I am aware that that is very difficult right now with the supply that we have. But if it is possible, and in an ideal world, we would want you to essentially push your vaccine date to about 10 days after you started feeling symptoms, and to also make sure that you haven't had a fever for at least 24 hours before you go ahead and get the vaccine. And the reason why we want to push it out is we don't want your body to be actively fighting an infection, and then we give you a vaccine, and then perhaps you don't get as robust an immune response as we would want to protect you in the future. It also is not necessary to get a vaccine if your body is actively fighting an infection. And so in those types of patients, it is safe to just wait until they feel a lot better, and then we can readdress vaccination at that point.
Sounds good. So another question for you, kind of piggybacking off of that one, is the vaccine necessary for individuals that have previously had COVID-19?
That's also a very great question. And the answer is yes. And the scientific reason behind that is that we know that of all the people who get COVID-19, at least 10% of them will not be able to mount enough of a response where if they came across COVID again, they would not get reinfected. So about 10% of people for sure that have had COVID in the past are susceptible to have COVID again. And because right now we are not testing for amounts of antibodies, we don't necessarily have the ability to do that in a way that is meaningful right now. The safest thing to do is to just vaccinate everyone, regardless of whether they have had COVID in the past. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is, outside of that 10% group, that 90% that is left, there is no guarantee that the immune response when you have a natural infection, so when you actually do get COVID, your immune response may not be as robust as it should be. So you could have some sort of an immune response, but it may not be quite enough to fully protect you. And what that just means is, it's essentially, if you get a small response because your immune system was not activated well enough, then that immunity is going to wane faster. And those are things we're trying to prevent. We do know, based on previous years, that in general, vaccines are able to cause an immune response that is way more robust and is more measurable. And so given the vaccine, even though somebody has had COVID-19, is a safer way to ensure that if they do come across the virus, that they are protected, versus just relying on an antibody response that we cannot measure.
Thank you for that. So an additional question, which is pretty much kind of following that same idea as the previous, is should you get the second dose if you test positive?
That's also a very good question. And I can tell you that I have had a couple patients that this has happened with, and has stirred a lot of discussion on what do we think and what is the best way and the safest way to handle these patients? And for a lot of these types of questions and scenarios, we do look to the CDC for some kind of guidance. So the CDC guidance right now is, if someone received the first dose and then they get COVID, the guidance is essentially to get the second dose, but you can push it out to about 90 days since you got COVID. And the reason why is because based on the evidence that we've seen in patients who were reinfected, the reinfection is rare in a 90-day period. So within that 90 days, it's unlikely that somebody is going to get reinfected. So the best way to handle those types of patients is you got dose 1, then you got COVID. You want to wait about 90 days or close to 90 days and then get the second vaccine. It's not bad to have more antibodies than, say, somebody who got the vaccine. And it's unlikely that is going to cause any issues, and we don't have evidence of that. And so for right now, the guidance is when somebody gets COVID after they got the first dose, wait about 90 days and then still give them the vaccine. And again, all of this is trying to ensure that if you compare the risk of COVID to the benefit of protection, the benefit of protection is always the right answer.
Absolutely. So Dr. Christian, Dr. Dio kind of gave us the reasoning behind why we do want to get that second dose, but do you know if someone may have tested positive after that first dose in the clinical studies, and how was that handled?
Yes, I have a slide for that one as well. So in this study, both Pfizer and Moderna, they did have patients who got the first vaccine, and then before they could get the second vaccine, they got tested by the nasal swab and they were positive. So in Pfizer vaccine, on the picture on our left, there were 39 patients who experienced this. When you're talking about 40,000 people, 39 is very little, but there were 39, and those patients were not excluded. So looking through the trials, neither one of them actually said when the patients were vaccinated, but that was not an exclusion criteria for them to do so. So it's probably like Dr. Dio was saying, between feeling better, because sometimes if you didn't have symptoms at all, then they may feel comfortable with giving them their second vaccination. So between feeling better and making sure you had that 10 days of quarantine, well, it was 14 days in the study, but now 10 days of quarantine. And after that, by the 90-day mark, you could receive that second vaccine. So both of the studies had people who tested this way, and they handled it in a way where they were given the vaccine, but not exactly, they did not put when they received the vaccine. So that's definitely a great question. I also want to add, for my hospital, we leave it up to it's like a patient discussion. So I had a colleague who got the first dose, and like a week after she was tested positive for COVID. So likely already was exposed to COVID, right? Already around a lot of people, got the vaccine while she was actually sick, but no symptoms. And she went out for her 10 days. And when she came back, she felt comfortable enough, like she didn't have any symptoms. She felt comfortable enough to get her vaccine right when she came back. And then she did feel ill. So I will, because we're being honest with you guys. So after her having COVID and getting the vaccine right after, knowing she had COVID a few days ago, she did experience more of the side effects. Nothing too serious. She just had some nausea, headache, and things like that. But I think closer to that, the COVID illness and the vaccination, you may have a few more side effects because your body is really ready to handle COVID. Once they see it again, your immune system takes over and really tries to help you, that fight, your body feels that fight with fatigue and everything like that. So I think it's a patient discussion as well, but like the 90-day mark, knowing where our antibodies are waning, I definitely agree with that statement too. So thank you for that question.
And to round this part of the question up, should you restart the series in the event that you miss the grace period that you all talked about?
That's also a very great question. And the answer is no. And the reason why that is the answer is, again, we do not know we don't have evidence to say yes or no. So the best way to handle it right now is to say no. And all of that is going to be assessed in the studies that are ongoing, that are continuing to collect data to see if that is a necessary thing to do for patients who perhaps missed that dose. But based off of what we know right now about vaccines in general and how they work, it's unlikely that you would need to restart. There's very few vaccines where we have to restart all over because you missed the grace period. And there actually are some vaccines, not necessarily the mRNA ones, because we don't know that for sure, but there actually are some vaccines where the further out you get that second dose, the more robust your immune response is. So the immune system is a very interesting system, to be honest. And it's really fascinating in how it is able to protect us and how it works. But the short answer to that is the CDC's recommendation is not to restart. The recommendation is to just go ahead and get the second dose whenever that comes up.
Can I just say a quick little add on to that? So I think it's also important to remember that with the first dose of each the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, you're getting around 50% efficacy or 50% effectiveness. So it's not the 94 or 95% effectiveness in reducing your risk of developing severe COVID or becoming hospitalized with COVID, but you still have at least 50% more of a chance of not getting to that point, which is a lot more than if you didn't have one dose at all. So it's important to understand that 2 doses would get you to that 94, 95%, but at least with the first dose, you're batting about 50, 55, 57%.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Maxim, Dr. Dio. So we are going to, I guess, pass the mic to me, and then I'm going to go ahead and go through just the science behind the vaccine. So of course we end up, back again at what exactly are mRNA vaccines. And Dr. Christian talked a little bit about the adenovirus vectored vaccines, so Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. But while we don't have data for these vaccines, we do know how they work. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to discuss both of these, because prior to when we will likely discuss information about these vaccines again, the data would have come out and these vaccines will likely be available. So at least in the event that this is something that your county or wherever you are to go to get vaccinated, in the event that they are offering this, you'll be educated on what these vaccines are and roughly what you can expect to see. So here we have the mRNA vaccines. And I'll kind of use some of the anecdotes that I used in the previous conversation to explain them. So mRNA is something that readily occurs in our bodies. So it's messenger RNA. We have messenger RNA, we have RNA, we have DNA. And messenger RNA is distinct, is different from each one of these, each of the previous forms of nucleic acid that I explained. So it's different from DNA, it's different from RNA. So messenger RNA sends messages to our cells on specific proteins to make so that we can survive. So in this case, when you are injected with this vaccine, this messenger RNA sends a message to your cells to make the spike protein that is significant to the coronavirus. So once your body sees this spike protein that's significant to the coronavirus, it then creates an immune response or protection against this coronavirus. So in the event that you were ever to see this coronavirus again in real life, you would be protected because your body has seen it before, it's coded for a significant piece of it. So it knows what it looks like, it knows what that significant piece looks like, and it's able to mount an appropriate response so that you are protected from it. So just kind of doubling back, and let's think about this in lay terms. So, and kind of put that first and second dose into perspective, because I know we heard a lot about numbers and we heard a lot about immunity and things like that. So let's scientifically put that into perspective. So you are injected with that vaccine. Let's think of this as you being a parent and you being a child and hearing your parents say, clean your room. So that first tell to clean your room. It's kind of nice, you know. It's not loud, it's not robust. It's a gentle reminder, hey, your room's dirty, you need to clean it up. So you get that first dose and it's saying, hey, you need to make this spike protein, and so that you can be protected against it should you see it. So that's that first dose. That second dose is your parent having told you to clean your room prior, saying, hey, your room needs to be clean. So that second dose is telling your body, hey, I showed you this spike protein. You need to make sure that you make protection against this should you ever see it. You know, this is not a drill, this is serious. So that's what these mRNA vaccines do for us. And that's why, as Dr. Maxim said, when you get that first dose, you're batting at 50. So that means that, you know, you got that slow warning to clean your room. But when you get that second dose, that is that full warning. If you don't clean this room immediately, you are done. So that is the mRNA sending that message to your cells to say, make this spike protein because this is serious. This is not a drill. So that's why we need 2 doses, and that's essentially what that mRNA does. So mRNA is in no way incorporated into our DNA. So like I said, all of these are very much distinct. We have mRNA, we have RNA, we have DNA. They all have very distinct features. And mRNA in no way becomes integrated into our DNA, therefore no powers, no chip, nothing of the sort. You're injected with it. And the mRNA, another thing about that is it's very short lasting. So once you're injected with the mRNA, once your body's received that message to make that spike protein, that mRNA is eliminated from our bodies. It leaves in your stool, or it leaves. It's just no longer there. So what does that mean? If it's only there for about 2 to 3 days, it in no way can exist in any other form in your bodies. So when you get that vaccine, you now know what the mRNA is telling your body to do, and you can now rest assured that it will be in no way incorporated into your DNA. I just want to make sure that that's reinforced. So our examples of those mRNA vaccines will be Pfizer and Moderna, but now we have these adenovirus vectored vaccines that we're hearing about, the Janssen and AstraZeneca. So adenoviruses are unable to cause true infection in humans. So whatever response that your body feels is very mild, but what it can do is it can carry specific information similar to mRNA vaccines to make that specific spike protein. So that is what it can do. So it acts like a Trojan horse. I don't know if any of you all have seen Troy, the movie Troy. I hear that the Spartans, 300, I think is the movie. I hear a lot about these movies, never seen it, but I hear this is where the Trojan horse metaphor comes from. So when you are injected with this vaccine, your body thinks that it's seeing an actual virus that it has to mount a response to. But what it is actually seeing is that information to make that specific spike protein for the coronavirus. So essentially, when you're injected with that, your body sees that spike protein, and then once again, you are able to develop a response or develop protection against this spike protein. So that's where it differs, just a different mechanism to pretty much send that same information to your cells. So the difference between these studies, and of course you'll start hearing a difference in numbers, but I don't like to talk about data I haven't seen yet, that I haven't been able to digest myself. But what I can say is there was a bit of a difference in what they saw in terms of effectiveness or efficacy. So they saw about 75% with the Janssen vaccine in comparison to that 95% that we see with the mRNA vaccines. And also with this Janssen vaccine or Johnson & Johnson, you can receive only 1 dose of this rather than receiving the 2. So while the reason that you can receive the 1 dose in comparison to the 2 is they did in fact do a 2-dose vaccine study right alongside the 1-dose vaccine study to see would there be a difference if someone were to receive 2 doses versus if they were to receive 1 dose. They did not see a difference there in terms of whether a person would have protection, meaning you get no more in the way of protection from 2 doses than you would get from 1, which is why you can receive that Janssen vaccine as just 1 dose. So I think that we also have to put into perspective, we never thought that we would see 95 or 94% efficacy, or you know, right now we hear efficacy and effectiveness used interchangeably with these vaccines, but we never thought that we would see that with these mRNA vaccines. It just so happened that they were spectacular, right? That just so happened that that was what we saw. But what we can say that's consistent between that 75% and that 94 and that 95% are the people that actually develop severe COVID-19. And we know that even with this 94, and even with this 95% efficacy, that does not mean that you cannot get COVID-19, because you can. Dr. Christian eloquently explained that a colleague of her did in fact develop COVID-19 after being vaccinated. So you can develop COVID-19 after you are vaccinated. So, you know, kind of taking that and comparing that to the Janssen study, while it may have only been seen to be 75% effective, when it came down to severe COVID-19, there were not individuals that had severe COVID-19. There were not individuals that died from COVID-19, and that is consistent across the board with these clinical studies. And that's important, because despite the fact that we see that 94, that 95, and that's different from that 75, we still see people that get COVID-19. And what we don't want to see is people that get severe COVID-19, because we know that can equal just the really bad events that we see associated with COVID. So I say keep that in mind. And like I said, I don't like to speak about data that I can't say, but I stand firmly behind, if a vaccine is made available to you, you take it. So I do hear, I did get an additional question that talks about that asked me if there was any data covering the long-term resistant strains that can develop, you know, from the vaccines, of course, and just kind of how we explain T cell and B cell immunity. So this sounds like a question that may have been asked from someone that's in science. So I will make this as plain as I can when I do explain this. But I do have an infographic, excuse me, that I believe does a fine job at just explaining immunity or protection that we get against the spike protein, and kind of talking about resistant strains and what do we do when we see that and things of that sort. So I think that it's always important that we remember that viruses are smart. Our bodies are smart, but so are viruses. And after a while, viruses begin to what we hear in the world as mutate, where they begin to change, meaning that they change different features of themselves so that they can evade the protection that your body makes against them. And different viruses in different regions or in different areas of the country, different areas of the world, change in different ways. That's why it's important that we socially distance. And it's also important that we don't go to other regions, because like I said previously, you never leave, you know, empty-handed. So you can leave with whatever it is that they have there, or you can take whatever it is that we have here there. So viruses, they change, and they change so that they can continue to thrive, despite the fact that our bodies are developing ways to protect ourselves against them. So here we have this picture of the spike protein, right? So I talked about that spike protein, the significance of the coronavirus. So with that spike protein, we develop different types of protection against the spike protein. So our bodies are smart, right? We don't just make one type of antibody or we don't have just one type of immunity that we develop against these vaccines. We develop different types of protection. So we see these antibodies here. We see one that's blue, we see one that's yellow, we see one that's purple, we see one that's green, pink, so on and so forth. And we see that they attach to very different areas of that spike protein, meaning that they find different ways to make sure that we have maximum protection. And then we also see our T cells. So we have two different branches of immunity. So we have our T cells, and then we have what we see here as labeled as antibodies, or they're further called B cells or memory cells. So our T cells are what are released immediately. As soon as our body sees that spike protein, our T cells run out and they say, oh no, this is a foreign invader. We have to get this out right now. So that's what our T cells do. But our antibodies or our B cells or our memory cells are exactly what they sound like. They remember that they've seen, this specific spike protein. So a bit after our T cells come, we get our antibodies that rush in, and they take inventory of the fact that they've seen the specific spike protein. And we have different types of memory cells. We have different types of memory that we develop against that specific spike protein. So I think this picture on the right does a good job at showing change in that spike protein, or what we will explain as a mutation. So here we can see that one of the antibodies no longer binds, because why? These spike proteins and these viruses change in different areas so that they can continue to just kind of run away from that response that our body develops against it. But while this antibody no longer works, or we no longer have protection in this one area of that spike protein, we still see all of these that work, right? So that just goes to show it's important that we get vaccinated, because we know we'll develop different types of protection against that spike protein. So despite one mutation or one change, that doesn't mean that we're no longer going to be protected. But to put this into more of a scientific perspective, these and as Dr. Christian so eloquently stated, these companies that develop these vaccines, they understand that they do have to continue to supply data showing that their vaccines do in fact work. And when I say do in fact work, they have to show that they do in fact work against these changes in the virus, or these mutations, or these new variants. So they have to show that they're able to work against them. And thankfully, the Pfizer and Moderna individuals that are conducting these studies, the scientists behind the scenes are very comprehensive, and they have been able to show that they are able to protect, these vaccines are still able to protect us against these new strains or these new changes. So of course that protection is a bit different, right? So while you may have developed this amount of antibodies when you got the vaccine, you may now only develop this amount of antibodies or this amount of protection when you get the vaccine. However, that's still more than this amount of protection that you need to be overall protected from COVID-19. And you'll certainly be more protected than you would be should you not get vaccinated. So that's why it's important, despite changes and despite mutations, that you still get vaccinated. And then I got another question asking about the new strains that are being found. And it says it seems to be a bit more contagious. What do we do in terms of that? And yeah, so we've heard that, right? We've heard, and I think I heard Dr. Fauci say it eloquently. He said that it's more transmissible, meaning that it's easier for the virus to travel from person to person. So now, when it was just maybe a 20% chance that you would get COVID if you were around somebody that had COVID-19, in the event that somebody is infected with that variant, it's now a 50% chance that you'll get COVID-19 if you are next to someone, or if you're around somebody that tests positive for COVID. And why is that? That's because different changes in that spike protein or different mutations cause the virus to do different types of things. So one particular mutation can cause that virus to be easier in respect to how it travels from person to person. So I think that's why it's important that we just continue to reinforce social distancing. That's why that's so important, because at the end of the day, you can't control which strain you become infected with in terms of COVID-19. You can't control what variant it is that you are infected with, but it's important to know that different changes in that spike protein, different types of mutations can cause these viruses to do different types of things. So in the event that you are infected with that variant or that mutated strain that is easier to travel between person to person, that could be very detrimental. So you want to make sure that you mask up, you want to make sure that you socially distance, and then you want to make sure that you get vaccinated so that you can protect not only yourself, but others. And then I had a question of, have there been any difference noticed in the longevity of antibody coverage gained from vaccination versus actual infection? And this is honestly my favorite question to answer. I don't know why, but I think it feels more scientific than most. But I think that what's important to know, and I think Dr. Dio actually did an eloquent job touching on this, is that we don't exactly know the amount of antibodies that you develop from actual infection. So we don't know that if somebody were to be asymptomatically infected, meaning that they didn't have any symptoms, we don't know if they would develop that same amount of protection as somebody that wasn't, as somebody that may have had severe COVID-19. So kind of putting that into perspective, Dr. Dio said about 10% of individuals can be reinfected with COVID-19. So that kind of attests to the fact that you don't know the type of protection that you have, although you've had COVID-19. You just don't know that. But what you do know, and once again, Dr. Dio did a great job at explaining this. You were ahead of your time, Dr. Dio, as far as the questions were concerned. But with the vaccination, we know the amount of protection that you develop. We know the amount of antibodies that are developed. They are easily quantifiable, meaning we can easily count them, we can easily measure them, and we know the ones that will be required to give you that protection that you would need against COVID-19. So that's why it's important that you get vaccinated, because we actually know the amount of antibodies that you develop after vaccination, and we can reliably see whether those antibodies were developed. In actual infection, we don't know the amount of antibodies that you develop. We can't reliably find out the amount that you may have developed. So that won't necessarily mean that you have enough to be protected against the virus should you have had it. And then finally, if a person is fully vaccinated, could they contract COVID, and then could they pass it on to someone else that is not vaccinated? The short-ended answer is, it is our hope that with these vaccinations that you develop enough immunity to where, and we call this in the scientific community, you develop antibody titers, meaning that you have enough protection to where the COVID-19 virus would cease to exist in what we call your nares, or your nose, which is how you easily transmit that to other people. We know it's a respiratory infection, meaning that you inhale droplets. So that is the scientific assumption that we make as scientists, that you would have enough protection following that vaccine. Is that absolutely true? No, it is not. So you could potentially give that virus to someone else that is not vaccinated. So, and as we know from the clinical studies, a lot of times, and I know Dr. Dio and Dr. Christian talked about this, and Dr. Christian talked about a friend of hers that developed COVID-19, and she didn't have any symptoms after she had received that first dose of the vaccine. So you may in fact be asymptomatic, because we know that there was a low amount of people that actually developed severe COVID-19 or COVID-19 to where they had just out loud symptoms. So there is that case that you could carry it and not know. And that's why we always state that although you've gotten vaccinated, that doesn't mean that, you should go to Super Bowl parties. And, to compound in Atlanta, that means that you should continue to wear your mask. And that means that you should continue to socially distance, because we don't have that information as to where, if someone didn't know that they had COVID-19, could they pass it to someone else? So that's why you have to continue to protect yourself and to protect others, although you are vaccinated. So that is it for my long-winded spiel on the coronavirus pathophysiology, as we call it, or pharmacology or science. So we're going to launch and keep going at a steady pace and launch into the vaccine adverse effects. So Dr. Sumiyu, if you want to go ahead and talk about that.
Sure. So we often get the question, what is the most severe reaction that you can get from the actual vaccine? And so that the one that comes to mind is probably anaphylaxis. That would be an allergic reaction. If you actually look at the ingredient list, the one thing that if you were to have an allergy to to the vaccine, that ingredient would most likely be polyethylene glycol. It is in a lot of our foods, but other than that, there's really not much else. Like we expect from most other vaccines, you may feel slight, fever, kind of tired, headache, muscle pain. Those are expected. It simply means that the vaccine is actually working, and that is kind of in juxtaposition to what you would feel like if you actually had COVID, which is cough, shortness of breath, loss of taste, etc. Just to kind of touch on the whole Bell's palsy thing, because I know we have all heard about in the news certain cases where patients did experience that. So in the Pfizer study, there were four cases. All of those people did actually get the vaccine. In the Moderna, there was also four. Only 3 of those people did get the vaccine. But we also kind of have to look at the bigger picture. The annual incidence of Bell's palsy is about 23 per 100,000. When we look at the actual study, that actually it translates to about 11 per 100,000. So it's actually less than what we would expect to see in the just the general population. But like Robbie said earlier, the FDA is certainly they are monitoring adverse effects with the vaccine adverse event reporting system.
Thank you, Dr. Sumiyu, absolutely. And just, to kind of piggyback off of that briefly, with Bell's palsy, I think it's important that we understand that this is something that could occur after any vaccine. Bell's palsy is just an immune response. That's when your body is injected with any type, or you become infected with any type of virus, which when you are injected with vaccine, you are exposed to low amounts of viruses. So that can in turn result in Bell's palsy. So in the event that you were to actually develop a virus, Guillain-Barré syndrome can be associated with the development of Bell's palsy. Or if you were to get something as simple as a routine flu vaccine, you could develop, Bell's palsy. It's low potential for that, but that is something that could occur with the exposure to viruses. All righty, and then Dr. Maxim, a question for you. What are the contraindications, meaning what are the cases in which you cannot get the vaccine?
I definitely feel like this question comes up a lot, and it's really simple to answer because there's only a small percent of patients that actually fall under this category. So essentially, patients that have had an allergic reaction to the actual first dose of the mRNA vaccine or the vaccine components, or patients who have any type of immediate allergic reaction to the vaccine, its components, or polysorbate, it is recommended that you be evaluated by an immunologist or an allergist prior to getting the vaccine, weighing risk versus benefit. And essentially, I will go into the next slide and kind of explain why all of a sudden polysorbate and some of the vaccine components are what we're kind of cluing and focus on. So of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the components of the vaccine, of course, are going to be the mRNA component, as well as some fats, and then you have some salts and sugars and buffers. But something that I wanted to point out is actually one of the main components is the polyethylene glycol, which is found in both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The short version or the abbreviated version is PEG. PEG is also found in a lot of your common laxatives. So Miralax is polyethylene glycol 3350. And essentially polyethylene glycol, or PEG, and polysorbate, which is an excipient or an inactive ingredient in a lot of different medications, a lot of different vaccines, including the flu vaccine, including the pneumococcal vaccine. These actually have similar chemical structures. And so that is why it is thought that if you have a reaction or an allergic response to polysorbate, that you could potentially have the same type of response to polyethylene glycol. So actually at my institution, we are, when I say we, I don't mean me at all, but the institution is actually testing patients. So if they have a reaction to the vaccine, they're actually doing an allergy skin test to see which component of the vaccine may this patient have reacted to, identifying that particular component, and then putting that in their medical record. So we know, okay, if another future vaccine, let's say the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is available to that person in the future, and it doesn't contain polyethylene glycol, but that was the piece that they actually were allergic to, then they could potentially go on to quote unquote complete their course with potentially a Johnson & Johnson. Now, I won't go on record to say if that's actually going to be what the CDC recommends for those people who did not complete their 2-dose series, but it is something to possibly consider in the future.
Thank you so much. And I actually love your institution. I love that your institution is doing that. And then I'm going to see if we, meaning not me, can do that at, at my institution. So Brenda, a question for you is, would it be a problem for a woman who is pregnant or breastfeeding to get vaccinated?
Sure. So it is actually not a problem for somebody who is pregnant to get the vaccine. The data is very limited, as it is in most cases in pregnancy. It is more so a case of personal choice. Just you kind of have to think about your personal likelihood of exposure. You also have to think about the potential complications that can happen to you if you are pregnant. From what we have seen, there may be more serious. Those who are pregnant are at a higher risk of being hospitalized and requiring a higher level of care. So you kind of just have to take those into consideration. In terms of safety, based on what we know about the mRNA vaccines, it is not expected that it would harm the it's not expected that it would harm the fetus. And there's actually a little bit of data that some of the immunity that the mother generates can actually cross the placenta and actually help to also keep the baby safe. But based on what we know, the components of the vaccine are they should be safe in pregnancy as well as lactation.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback on Brenda, just to offer some, because I did provide the clinical info on this last time, they did in fact include pregnant patients in the Mrna study unknowingly. So these women were pregnant and didn't know that they were pregnant. It was about 13 of them, 6 women being in the group that did not receive the vaccine, and then 7 being in the group that did, 6 women being in the group that did receive the vaccine, 7 of them being in the group that did not. And they noted poor pregnancy outcomes in 3 of the women that actually did not receive the vaccine. So the vaccine was not attributed to any type of outcome. They are still assessing the clinical studies, and there are pregnant women that have since gotten the vaccines, and they've been enrolled to the VAERS, and that Dr. Christian talked about, and they'll continue to watch them to see how it is that they perform. But like Dr. Sumiyu said, it is very important that you consider the fact that getting COVID-19 is definitely more of a risk than getting vaccinated. And then additionally, Moderna, who I feel was very comprehensive, also went forward to do a study in pregnant rats, which is important because they share a similar biology to humans. And in those pregnant rats, they did not they did not see any type of pregnancy-related poor outcomes in those rats that were exposed to the vaccine. So just something to keep in mind in the event that you are pregnant and the vaccine is made available to you. So Dr. Maxim, would having a weakened immune system impact your ability to mount an immune response?
So we speculate that patients who are immunocompromised have an immune system that can't respond as, I'll use the word that you always use, Jacinta, is having that robust response. So if we say that the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccines are both 94 to 95% effective, we can't guarantee you that if you're immunocompromised that you'll have that 94 to 95% reduced rate of getting severe COVID, right? So essentially going back to that original slide of contraindications, it's currently not contraindicated in immunocompromised patients. HIV patients were at least included in the Pfizer study. I don't remember off the top of my head if transplant patients were included, but essentially we don't have the data yet. I'm sure they're still, analyzing it and getting ready to publish it in another update of the trial results. So right now, all we can say is, if you don't fall under that contraindicated category, please discuss with your provider and, definitely weigh risk versus benefit. And if you feel that it's important to at least have some type of immune response, whether it be 85%, 70%, 60%, if you'd rather have at least something, then I encourage you to get it. And I kind of want to speak a little bit to another question that you may ask, or maybe I'll just wait for you to ask it regarding antibodies. I think that's the next question.
Oh, no, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay, so I just wanted to touch on essentially how long do these antibodies last? The short answer is we don't know, right? So if you look on Google or, your favorite WebMD, I don't know what pops up in your search engines, you'll see a very similar graphic, which essentially explains how your immune response, how your immune system responds to COVID. So starting from the far left is when essentially your body is infected with COVID. And as the weeks progress on the x-axis at the bottom, you can see at the top that you start to develop symptoms. You have more of what we call your COVID-19 pneumonia, your disease. And then eventually, all these IgGs, IgA, IgG, IgM, those are your antibodies and different types of antibodies that begin to, that are created in response to the disease. And if you look at the very end of the graph, it just kind of stops at 4 weeks. It doesn't start to go down, it just kind of plateaus. And if we were to keep drawing that, we don't know where it goes. Eventually it will eventually go down. We don't have antibodies forever for COVID-19, but we just don't know how long it lasts. So we're still trying to figure that out. Bear with all of the scientists that are working tirelessly to evaluate that. But we're doing the best we can with what we have. And again, our biggest take home is to help reduce the risk of developing severe COVID or being hospitalized with COVID.
Yep. All righty. So we have Dr. Sumiyu. Will getting the vaccine prevent you from getting COVID-19? I think we talked about this several times, but it never hurts to reinforce.
Right, but just to reiterate, no, it is not 100% effective, but the numbers actually look really, really good. If you go to the next slide, the flu vaccine, for example, in a good year, it's about 60% effective, but unlike the flu shot where, it has to target 3, 4, 5 strains, the COVID vaccine, we really only have this one strain that it has to target, and that's why we were really able to get this really high percentages in terms of efficacy. And so will it completely prevent you? No, but you have a pretty good shot. And so like we keep iterating, it's better to have something than nothing. And so, and like we had mentioned earlier, even though the COVID-19 virus, you know, it does have the potential to mutate, it's definitely not as quickly as, you know, the flu virus does. And so it should still be able to confer that protection.
Thank you so much. And then lastly, Dr. Maxim, will getting the COVID-19 vaccine confer any type of protection to the flu virus?
No, but you know what can help with that is wearing a mask and social distancing and washing your hands. So like we've talked about, the vaccine is very specific to COVID-19, or excuse me, it's very specific to SARS-CoV-2. But what you're actually doing is actually preventing other viruses as well by your non-pharmacological means. In fact, our flu rates have significantly dropped. We reported at my hospital, at least over the last few months, that we haven't seen a single case of influenza A or influenza B. That is significantly reduced since last season. And that's kind of what was also being seen in Australia, because they had their flu season as we were just getting to our summer. And so we were able to look at that data, and the CDC reported kind of the same things, that they were seeing reduced flu rates, but of course, unfortunately, increased COVID rates. So it's interesting to see what exactly preventing the spread of various viruses. So it's important to still wear your mask, still social distance, still wash your hands.
Absolutely. But I think that that's also just a testament to how important it is to actually socially distance, and how important it is to essentially wash your hands. So I mean, like, just from our efforts for COVID-19, and you know, we can't even say that everyone's been 100% compliant, but I mean, just look at the rates of the flu, how they've been reduced. I think similar to Dr. Maxim, we've had a single case, and then we were all, I think we were flabbergasted in the ICU. We were like, oh my goodness, this person has the flu. We haven't seen no cases of the flu. And that's something that's usually, I mean, Dr. Sumiyu explained how the flu vaccine is literally 44% effective. So, I mean, that's something that we see yearly, but this year we have seen barely any case. Like, I can't wait for the data to actually become available. So that's how, well, we can see that the protective measures that we take for COVID-19 are things that we need to integrate long-term, because that's something that can also help against other diseases. So at this present time, I am going to ask the wonderful people behind the curtain to make that chat feature live so that I can go ahead and field additional questions that we may receive. And I'll just stop sharing my screen. All righty. So if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we can get them answered for you all. Or if you all want to ask them aloud, that's also fine.
Don't be shy.
I think we just did such a great job explaining everything that we have no questions. Very informative, gang. Okay, so we have one question. So how long after receiving the vaccine will you remain protected from the virus since the vaccine is 95% efficacious. So Dr. Maxim, since you so eloquently explained this initially with your graphs, I'm gonna let you go ahead and take that one again.
So we don't know, and that's only because we are still looking at the data. So I've seen some reports that maybe say antibodies last 8 months. I don't know that to be true. I've also heard 3 months. I don't know that to be true just yet. The important thing is to get vaccinated. That's like the first hurdle, right? Is to make the appointment, get vaccinated, and then we can start evaluating how long are we going to be protected. The idea is ultimately to create this herd immunity so that we can essentially reduce the transmission rates and eventually have the pandemic behind us. But right now we just need to get vaccines into arms and then kind of go from there. But yeah, we don't know right now.
So we have an additional question, and that question is, how long are the vaccines still good if a person misses the second dose? So Dr. Dio, since you explained this initially, I'll go ahead and let you take that one.
Sure. And I think this is a question that people will keep asking. And the answer to that is, I can't tell you a specific amount of time because nobody knows that. However, the current guidance right now from the CDC is that if you miss the second dose, so let's say you got the Pfizer vaccine for your first dose and 21 days later, you didn't go get it and it's day 60 and you still haven't gotten your second dose. The recommendation from the CDC at this time, based off of what we know about the vaccines and in general, how we think they work, is to just go and get that second dose. You don't have to restart it. You don't have to get 2 additional doses, just get the second dose. And as we know more, that may change. But as of this time, based on what we know, if you miss that 21-day window or your 28-day window, just go get it when you remember.
I see an additional question, and it says, okay, sorry, I actually lost the additional question. We got an influx of questions right now. Okay, so the additional question is, do we believe that the vaccine will be given annually, similar to the flu, even as a 2-dose series? So I can offer my opinion, and if anybody else has anything on that. So in regard to the vaccine, and it's similarly to the flu, you know, we can say what we have available to us in terms of data, but I think, you know, in respect to where we are in terms of immunity, in respect to where we are with people complying with social distancing and the COVID-19 precautionary measures, I think that at least for the next 2 to 3 years, this is likely going to be a vaccine that we take again. Do I know this to be proven by data? No, I don't. So I could very well be wrong when they produce information following these studies, but I always tell people, prepare for the worst. And then, you know, if you get something, or prepare for what it is you don't want, and if something ends up being different, then that's the case. But I think that, you know, also with the mRNA vaccines, they're very easy to adjust. So they could adjust if they needed to adjust for different variants they may develop or different mutations that may develop against the vaccines. They are able to do that. And then, and they are able, and we see that even with the Janssen vaccine, that's something that doesn't exist as a 2-dose series, that you can get a single injection of that. So we know that there are other vaccines that are in the pipeline, and, you know, you possibly won't have to have 2. But then also with these mRNA technologies, they're advanced to where you don't just have to have COVID-19. They could also construct that technology to also incorporate a flu strains if they needed to. So potentially you wouldn't have to get different types of vaccines. You could get like one mRNA vaccine, and that can account for different types of for different viruses as well. So that's kind of how you can make it kind of more palatable in the event that we have to take that more than just this initial time, and if we have to take that as well as other vaccines. I guess, and I'll allow for the other conversationalists to interject on this point. I think this is going to become, a question of the future. How long do we have to take this vaccine? But,
I think it is unlikely that it will be 2 series every time. I think it is more likely a situation where you will need 1 booster shot, however frequently you need to take it. So we wouldn't need to do another 21-day repeat after you got the first dose. That's very unlikely, but I think that's probably as best as I can guess. I think that right now, based off of what we know, the first trial started months ago. And so far, we haven't quite needed, and actually some of the participants in the first phase 1 parts of the trials have had their antibodies checked, and they still have a good amount of antibodies. So it looks like it's going to be definitely way more than 8 months, but that is not based on real hard data that we have seen. That's more speculation based on it looks like. But yeah, I think that's the best way that I can answer without making stuff up as well.
all righty. So I have a question. Can I give a brief summary of how the vaccine works in the body? So since I talked about the mRNA vaccines, I'll go ahead and give that feedback to you guys. I mean, at this point, I think I explained mRNA vaccines in my sleep to myself. So mRNA is something that exists in our bodies normally. So it's different from RNA, it's different from DNA. And what it does is it sends messages to our cells on specific proteins to make so that we can perform normal functions. So in the case of the coronavirus, it sends a message to our cells to make the spike protein, which is a significant piece of the coronavirus. So once our bodies make this spike protein, it is then able, our bodies know that that spike protein is an unwanted visitor, something that's not supposed to be there. So then our body then mounts protection or develops antibodies against this one particular spike protein or significant piece of the coronavirus. So what does that mean when you have that protection from the vaccines? That means that if you were ever to see the coronavirus in real life, then you would be protected against it because your body would have seen the very distinct feature of the coronavirus via the mRNA vaccine. So mRNA is very short lasting, meaning that it's easily degraded. So when you are injected with that vaccine, then once your body receives that message to make that specific spike protein, that mRNA is then degraded and it's eliminated, never to be seen again. A question, because the Janssen vaccine will become a thing of the present. I think they are actually going in front. I can't remember if it's Janssen or AstraZeneca, but either way, one of these adenovirus vector vaccines will be going in front of the FDA on February 26th. So with that vaccine, it's kind of similar to the mRNA vaccines as to what it is that they do, but the adenoviruses are unable to cause true infection in humans, meaning that or if they do cause any type of response, it's like a mild cold. So your body thinks that it's actually seeing a true virus that it needs to protect itself against, but what it is actually seeing is the genetic material for making that spike protein. So similar to that mRNA vaccine, is seeing information to make that spike protein. So once you make that spike protein, then you are then, once you make that spike protein, your body does an action similar to the mRNA vaccines. It releases that protection against that spike protein. So should you see the coronavirus in real life, you will be protected against it. So it shares a similar science. The vaccine shares similar science in how they protect you against the virus. It's just different ways of delivering what it is that needs to get to you. That's really the difference there. So if that was what you needed in terms of the brief summary. Okay, so then I have another question. Can the vaccine be given in a different part of the body other than the upper arm? So Dr. Christian, since you did a bit of talking about the vaccine delivery mechanisms and blah, 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 I will let you go ahead and get that question there.
Yes, absolutely. So this is an intramuscular injection. So the most common place is the arm because it's easy. You don't have to take off a lot of things, but other muscles you could be injected in if for some reason something's wrong with your arm, would be like the muscle of your thigh, the muscle of your like buttocks, also like your muscle of your hip. So there are other options for injections intramuscularly.
Can I interject a little bit to that? I would say, as someone who's got both shots, one common effect is pain. Mm-hmm. And that pain is not necessarily significant, but it's not insignificant either, in the sense that I couldn't sleep on that arm when I went to bed that night. But when I was up and doing things, it didn't necessarily bother me. So if you choose to get your vaccine, for example, in your buttock, you may have trouble being able to sit. And I can tell you that pain lasted 24 hours because I timed it. So it's just something to keep in mind when you choose to get it in a different site. I think the beauty of getting it in the arm is that it may not interfere with your ability to go about the rest of your day. But I think the thigh is not also a bad spot to get it. I would consider somewhere else other than the buttock, because I don't know if you don't want to sit for 24 hours, that doesn't sound pleasant. So yeah.
We've given it a try before.
Yeah, that is great insight.
I, for one, would like to see someone get it in the buttocks. I can assure you that is not the pain that you want for that 24-hour time frame. So we have an additional question. I'll do a little bit of rewording because I'm not exactly sure about Hank Aaron, but so I guess, so what do we have to say about deaths following the receipt of the vaccine? And this is something that, of course, we talk about amongst ourselves, because we do want to be transparent and we want to make sure that we're offering comprehensive information in regard to the vaccine. So, I mean, I can let Dr. Maxim, you look like you have your mic unmuted. So I'll let you take it first. And then, of course, we can all interject and, you know, our thoughts, because I mean, I have, of course, thoughts on this as well. So I'll let you go ahead and lead us off.
It was unintentionally left on mute, but that's okay. I will start it off, no problem. I think we have to be very cautious when we assume that because someone got a vaccine on day 1 and ended up passing on day 17 or day 18, that it was related exactly to the virus, or excuse me, to the vaccine. Oftentimes in school, we learn about causality and correlation, and how correlation doesn't necessarily mean that although two things could be associated, that it doesn't mean that one caused the other to happen. And so I personally don't know what caused Hank Aaron to pass away. He was actually a friend of my family. I'm not sure how he passed away. And so I don't want to say that it was absolutely related to SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 or the vaccine. But I think we have to be very, very cautious in what we say causes something else, especially a mortality. And I think someone can explain in terms of the trials what mortality, if any, was shown in the studies.
I can take that if you guys want, and that's due to the fact that I was the one that presented on those studies and on the studies prior. So I believe that Dr. Christian kind of talked about the studies, and I would like to wholeheartedly agree with her in terms, and I've actually done my own research because I've done several education talks about COVID-19, and someone asked, you know, about other studies and how comprehensive the COVID-19 studies were, or robust, and my favorite word, Dr. Maxim pointed out, how robust they were in terms of enrolling study subjects. And the COVID-19 studies have the most that I have seen of enrollees. And for other studies, it took them about 10 years to enroll, not even almost a fraction of what it is that they were able to enroll in these COVID-19 studies. So first and foremost, before I give that information, but in terms of immortality, what Dr. Maxim means, there's death related to the receipt or receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. And there were no deaths related to receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. There were 2 deaths in the Pfizer study. However, they were related to more morbidities, or they related to events or sicknesses that were present in the patients that in no way were related to them receiving the vaccine. So I am very big on transparency. Transparent is my other favorite word. My husband tells me that all the time. So I'm very big on transparency, and in being big on transparency, like Dr. Maxim said, I don't make any type of correlations, or I don't say that one event was related to another. Being a clinician, I am a very whole picture type of person, and I don't have these whole pictures. All I have is what we know from the media. But what I can say is that these companies conducting these studies are very comprehensive, and the data that they do present and the data that they do develop, and the FDA is very comprehensive, and they are very in their process for actually approving these vaccines and making sure that these EUAs are sustained, meaning that they get to keep these EUAs. They do very full reviews of these events. So rest assured that, these are going to be explored and they are going to have information available. But what I also know is that the deaths are very low in comparison to the amount of people that have been vaccinated. So we know that there have been, as Dr. Christian said, more than 30 million individuals that have received the COVID-19 vaccine thus far. We have heard about a very small number of deaths that may or may not have been related to the vaccine in comparison. And we also know that there are greater than 500,000 United States citizens that have died from COVID-19. And we know that over 60,000 of that 500,000 have been Black. We know that about 24%, so 53% of Blacks and Latinos combined have represented the amount of COVID-19 deaths. That being that Blacks and Latinos only make up 13.4 and about 22% of the entire United States population, respectively, meaning that minorities are dying at highly disproportionate rates than what they even represent in the population. So I know that. So I like to speak on what it is I do know and why it is important that we do explore those options of getting vaccinated. I like to tell everybody you have your own choice whether you get the vaccine, but it's our duty as doctors, as professionals, as doctors of pharmacy, and as professionals to give that information to you all so that you can make advised decisions. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add.
I can add a little bit. I think that as it relates to deaths, there have been a lot of headlines and videos and just stories floating around about people dying. I think it's also important to keep in mind that one of the news flashes that went out was about a nursing home in Norway where a lot of the people there died. They were elderly people, right? And elderly people do die. So until we are able to say and have evidence that shows that vaccine is why they died, there are many other reasons why somebody who is 86, 87, 90 years old could die that have nothing to do with whether or not they received a vaccine. So I think that is something to always keep in mind. I think having skepticism about people, institutions that we have in the US is valid, but I think that we also should have skepticism when things are very sensational. That's generally my rule of thumb, is when something is very sensational, I'm way more skeptical about it than when it's just simple, because in my experience, the simple thing is usually the actual answer. So I think that that's something to kind of just keep in the back of your mind. These are not cases of 17-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-something-year-old person got vaccinated and died. These are cases of people who, outside of whether or not there were COVID vaccines, elderly people in the US do die every year. And we haven't seen an uptick because people started getting vaccines. So I think that those are things to kind of keep in mind as we assess it. Like Michelle and Jacinda both said, I cannot tell you, like, gun to my head, the vaccine did not kill somebody, but I also cannot tell you the opposite, that the vaccine did kill somebody, because we don't know. But I think that there are other potential reasons why people die that have nothing to do with whether or not they got a vaccine.
And the only part I want to add to that, thank you so much for this good discussion, ladies, is we're not saying sweep anything under the rug. We wanted it to be research. We wanted everything to be reviewed from coronary reports and everything, so we have the facts. But like they were saying, a lot of these things are put out by like anti-vaccine activists, and it's attached to these big stories. So yes, research it. Let us know if it is causing deaths, which was 42 million vaccinated and not many deaths. But if it was a larger number, believe me, we will be letting you guys know that, and to be aware of things, and it will probably be pulled already.
And I'll add to that, it's actually 140 million in the world vaccinated.
Awesome.
So it's actually way more.
United
Yeah.
States.
I mean, because some of those deaths have been reported outside of the US as well, and that's all been lumped together. But if you kind of put it in that context, that's about a third of the US population that has fully been vaccinated in the world total.
That's awesome.
All righty. And then we have the next question. What would you consider to be an allergic reaction to the first dose to postpone that second dose? Some say they have headache, chills, and muscle pain. Would those be considered allergic reactions? So, Dr. Maxim, I see you shaking your head. So go ahead. I'll let you take it.
No, those are not allergic reactions. It's more of what we call, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, reactinogenicity. So it's like your immune system telling you, hey, I'm working, I'm getting, woken up, I'm about to clean my room, I'm about to start working. When we say allergic reactions, we're talking about someone breaking out in hives, somebody, having their throat starts to close up, difficulty breathing, maybe you are collapsing, you pass out, allergic reactions like that, where you would need to seek medical attention. I often describe an allergic reaction, well, did you get medication for it? If you didn't get medication for it at the facility that it happened at, you likely didn't have an allergic reaction. Now, I'm not saying that it can't develop, after you go home and you kind of look down and realize like your whole arm is red. That can also happen, but we're talking about something that you can somewhat see or feel, not your typical arm soreness, nausea, vomiting. Those are more of like side effects versus an actual allergic reaction.
All righty. And then Dr. Sumiyu, I have a question for you. Can you get the second dose before that 21-day window?
So technically, yes, you want to stick to that 21-day, period as close as possible. I believe the current guidance right now is plus or minus 4 days from the CDC. So if you're super excited to get your second dose like I was, I showed up a day early, that's okay. But you do want to stick to as close to that 21 days period, because that's really where the data is.
And that was specifically for Pfizer, the 4 day, well, it's 4 days either way, but 21, you know, versus 28 for Moderna. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
And then Dr. Christian, do you have to get the injection at the same location, since you told us about where to get injected initially?
You do not. So they actually say whichever arm is not your dominant arm is where they would like to give the vaccine. But if you got it in your left and you're like, oh, I couldn't right and I'm left-handed, you could get it in your right. So you can definitely switch places if necessary. And go ahead with the buttocks.
Use the thigh, please, please. I work the COVID clinic today. I don't.
Don't use the buttocks.
Right, I'm like, I do the COVID clinic every week, please. But if you do get it in the buttocks, please let us know how the pain was. So if we are, a question for you, Dr. Sumiyu, is if you are being offered the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but you prefer to get one of the 2-dose vaccines, do you have a choice on which vaccine it is that you take?
So I will say right now that so first of all, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not available in the US currently. I don't know when that is going to change. However, my opinion would be that you should get the vaccine that's first available to you, because like a lot of people have pointed out, you don't really know when you're going to be able to get access to the vaccine again, because there are a lot of people out there that were trying to vaccinate, like Yewande had mentioned. She was trying to get her parents signed up and the lines are super long. And so I would say the first opportunity you have, go ahead and get it versus waiting to try to get, you know, that extra 1 or 2% from Moderna versus Pfizer.
All righty. And then we have another question. And this is exciting because we are also HIV specialists. Yay! So we got an HIV question. So are there any similarities to the COVID vaccine and to the PrEP medication to protect against HIV? So who wants to take this? This is fun. This is like a pharmacology question. So I
could go. No.
No.
You don't. You don't.
Yeah, no. The answer is just a straight up no. There's no. Let's start with comparing the HIV virus to the coronaviruses, right? That's because that's usually where people start making those comparisons. There's just no comparison. They're very, very, very different viruses in how they act when they're in the body, and what they do when they're in the body, and how we approach treating them. So that's the first step. Taking that and then trying to build on it, because of how these viruses act in the body and what they do, that means that the treatments and the drugs and whatever it is that we target to them are also going to be designed very differently. So for example, for HIV, we target very specific proteins when we give the drugs, and we give a cocktail that targets different types of proteins that we know the HIV virus produces. Those proteins are not present in the coronaviruses. And so there's no basis or any type of similarity between them. That's the first thing. The other aspect is PrEP is an actual medication, and it's not a vaccine. So the point of PrEP is that the goal is, if we give you PrEP and then you come across HIV, you have a drug in your system that can prevent you from, essentially going on to develop HIV. That is different from I gave you a vaccine that made your body make antibodies, so that when you see a virus, now your body can fight the virus. So they're very different approaches. The end goal is the same, prevention, but the way that we get to that end goal is very different, and they're very, very, very different viruses. So the comparison is very, very difficult to make, just because there's just really no similarity between the two of them other than they are viruses.
It would be similar to like comparing. Okay, I have a good one. Okay, follow me. So another drug that we have not discussed on this chat is called Bamlinibimab. It is a monoclonal antibody that is currently being tested for prophylaxis or prevention of COVID-19 in long-term care patients or nursing home patients. So several other monoclonal antibodies like Regeneron have been given, investigationally to patients to actually treat COVID-19. However, there are studies coming out that if you give the monoclonal antibody before somebody gets COVID, can it prevent the patient from getting COVID down the line? So that would be kind of similar to comparing it to PrEP. You wouldn't be taking Bamlinibimab every day like you do PrEP. PrEP you have to take every single day. Bamlinibimab you would take once. I believe that's how they're doing it for the prophylactic study or the prevention study. But it's to give your body that those instructions to potentially prevent getting the virus if it were to come in contact with the body. So like Yewande was saying, you're kind of comparing apples to oranges, but a more similar comparison would be Bamlinibimab for prevention versus PrEP or Descovy or Truvada for prevention.
Thank you, doctors. All righty, so then we have another question. If a patient recently received radiation or chemo, will it be an issue if they receive the vaccine? So, Dr. Christian, I saw your head shake, so I'm gonna let you take it.
Yeah, definitely not. If they've had chemo, there are more risk to get diseases because they are.
Oh no.
Oh, I thought maybe it was just me.
I think Dr. Christian may have. Oh, Dr. Christian, are you there?
Did you guys not hear me? I keep freezing. Something's going on with my internet.
I know.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, good.
Yes.
Okay, so if you recently had radiation or chemo, that is not an issue to get the vaccine. The chemo patient is immunocompromised because they likely have cancer while they're getting radiation and chemo. So it is, I think I'm frozen again. Oh no, I'm not. Okay, I see you guys. So it is recommended that immunocompromised patients get vaccinated. There's no contraindications to that.
And as Dr. Christian said, that just being because of the fact that if you have cancer and you were to get COVID-19, that would be far more dire than you receiving the vaccine. So Dr. Maxim actually talked a bit about this, about if you have a compromise, meaning your immune system isn't as robust, my favorite word, as if when compared to if you have cancer or any type of other immunocompromising disease states, so like rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. So you may not be able to generate or to make as much protection as somebody that has an intact immune system, meaning that nothing is wrong with their immune system. However, you will be able to make some protection, which would be far better than if you were to not be vaccinated at all. So right now, that is the recommendation, that you do get vaccinated, but please make sure that you talk to your primary care, whether that be a physician, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, because you may have to do some spacing in regard to oncology treatment therapies or rheumatoid arthritis, any type of like treatment therapies that you may take for any immunocompromising disease state, just so that they can make sure that the timing is on par for the type of reaction that you will have. So just an FYI, but it is recommended that if you are immunocompromised, and that being if you are receiving radiation or chemo, that you do get vaccinated. So we have another question. If you received, if a vaccine is not available for a second dose at the clinic where you got the first dose, can you get it somewhere else? Can you get the second dose somewhere else? I can answer that one just because I'm dealing with the mobile clinics, unless you guys have like awesome, okay. So you don't have to receive both doses at the same place. I know that they would like for that to happen. And until, you know, like CVS and the community pharmacies really developed their rollout process, it's recommended that you go to that same place. But because you have a vaccine card, that shows that you got the first dose, if you do go to like if you do go to your local pharmacy, then they are required to give you a second dose should you have not received it. So they will give you that second dose. I would say, you know, start calling around to those. If you know that you can't make it for that second dose, I would start calling around to the local community pharmacies and just seeing, when are you getting that second dose? Is it okay? When you getting these vaccines in, is it okay if I come in for that second dose? And make sure that they actually have the vaccine that it is that you received that first dose from, because you do have to get the same vaccine for your second dose. And then you can also talk to the people at the clinic in which you did go to. So, and you know, kind of ask them what you should do in the event that you cannot get your second dose at the specific location that you received your first, because they can likely direct you to where, because a lot of hospitals, I know mine, they have developed mechanisms for individuals that cannot get the second dose at a specific clinic. So ask them what they also have in place. But if you do have a vaccination card that shows that you got the first dose, you can go to a community pharmacy for your second one, if worst comes to worst.
I was just going to show them what the vaccine card looks like. So it will show like the type of vaccine that you got, and then the date and where you got it. And yeah, so everybody should get one of these, whether you get Moderna, Pfizer, whether you go on to get Johnson & Johnson. There's like talk about maybe having this to get into other countries, you know, so just so you guys are aware.
And I want to just add a little bit to that, Dr. Jam, if I can. So in Louisiana right now, we just started rolling out clinics, and I'm involved with Albertsons, which is a grocery store, but like a grocery store pharmacy. And we allocate the second dose once we give you the first. So if we give you the first dose, we say you got to come back during this time frame to get the second dose. And we did the first dose clinic, and now we're at the second dose clinic, and we find that some people may not show up, and we make just enough doses for those people who have appointments. And it's a whole very kind of convoluted process to make sure people are coming back in and get their dose. But what we've had patients do is, because we didn't give you the first dose, we don't feel comfortable giving you the second dose because we didn't count you in that a number. But if we have clinics, we let people know the days we have clinics, and you will call like towards the end of a clinic to see, are there any vaccine left over? Did somebody not show up? And then that's one way you'll be able to see if vaccines are available to you. Sorry, this COVID cough. It's still with me like a month later, or more than a month now. So yeah, so you kind of have to be creative, and I want to make sure that our people in particular, like our Black people, have the resources to do this, because it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be so worth it. Believe me, for somebody who actually had COVID, you do not want to have COVID, especially if there's vaccines that you can prevent, try to prevent this with. So try to call, find out who has clinics, and see how you can get on the wait list, even possible to get on the wait list if someone calls out or can't get their vaccine that day. So that's just another words of advice for you guys.
So
I do want to add.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Sumiyu, go ahead.
Super quick. Just in case maybe you end up losing your card, a lot of states are actually requiring, when you get the first vaccine, that the people who get the shot are they're added to like their state vaccine registration system. So if you do show up somewhere and you've lost your card, they might be able to just look you up and then know, yes, you did actually get the first dose.
All righty, so we actually have 2 questions. So if the conversationalists don't mind staying an additional 6 minutes, then we can round out these last 2. So the first question being herd immunity, and how long do we think it'll take to get to herd immunity? So I'll just take one person to answer this question. The last one is a mechanism of action question. So I guess I can take that one since I talked about MOA, mechanism of action. But if someone wants to take the herd immunity question.
I could try. Oh, go ahead, Brenda.
My short answer would be, it really just depends on how many people get the vaccine. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I have seen like different estimates, I guess, from different like experts on what percentage of the population we need to get vaccinated to reach herd immunity, and it's been anywhere from 70% up to 85%. So now, keeping that in mind and the rate at which we have been able to vaccinate people, is also another factor. We had really poor distribution, actually so far, and we still do right now. It's still very difficult for people who want to get vaccinated to get vaccines. There's way more people who have interest than we have supply. All of that, like, those are all factors that will affect when we eventually get to herd immunity. But I know that, like, I've seen some estimates that are super concerning given the rate that we have been vaccinated in the past. I believe this weekend was the highest number of vaccines given in one day, and we gave about 2 million vaccines on Saturday. And it might have been Friday, and then that dipped like literally the next day to 1 million. So we're still struggling to reach capacity of vaccinating as many people as possible. We have some issues with having enough people to vaccinate. On top of that, we don't have enough vaccines. And then on top of that, we have to reach a large number of the population. So it might and will likely take a while. I know that the Biden administration has a goal of vaccinating 100 million people in 100 days. It's been 2 weeks. So I don't know if we'll hit that, but I know that's a goal that they're trying to reach, which means if we can do that, then by the end of this year, we should have been able to reach everyone if that goal is able to be reached. So it all depends on so many factors, to be honest.
So thank you. Excuse me. Thank you guys for those answers, ladies. Okie dokie. So I'm going to talk about MOA, and I guess we can round it out talking about how we would pick between Moderna and Pfizer. So I guess I can kind of work that in MOA and mechanism of action, and then I'll leave you guys to kind of like add your 2 cents, and then we'll round out after these last 2 questions. So in regard to the mRNA vaccines and the adenovirus vectored vaccines, about are they similar in the way that they work. So you guys are going to have to listen to yet another annoying way that I now have to explain how these vaccines work. So we talked about mRNA vaccines. We know that you are given instructions on how to make this spike protein. And when you're given those instructions on how to make that spike protein, your body does it. And then you have a response, meaning you're protected against that spike protein because your body recognizes that once it's made, this spike protein is not supposed to be there. So then your immunity cells come out to protect you. So the adenovector viruses vaccines, they act like and as I said, I don't really know. I've never really seen Troy, but I hear this is where or 300, despite Gerard Butler, I've never seen it, but I hear that the Trojan horse is something back from the Sparta days. So they would think that they were just seeing a horse, but what they were really seeing was I guess soldiers that were piled into the wooden horse. So think of the vector vaccines as something similar to that. So adenoviruses are unable to cause true viruses in humans. They cause something that's like a mild cold. So your body thinks that it's seeing this an actual virus, but what it's actually seeing is the genetic information, which these adenoviruses, because they don't cause actual infection in humans, what they are they're very good for actually embedding things that we want to send to cells or send to bodies. So they're good for embedding genetic information. And in this case, they embed the genetic information on how to make that specific spike protein. So it's similar to mRNA vaccines. but it's different in the way that they are actually getting that spike protein to your bodies. So instead of a message being sent to your cells, it's now, you know, you getting the adenovirus. And then when your body sees this, then that genetic information being sent to your cells on how to make that spike protein. So a little bit different, but honestly a bit the same. Okay, so in regard to what vaccines do we prefer in terms of Moderna and Pfizer? So yeah, I guess as you said, Ruth, they're similar in terms of efficacy. So with Moderna, we saw 94.1% efficacy, and then with Pfizer, we saw 95%. But I even go a bit deeper than that, and I look at the actual numbers of those that were infected with COVID-19. So how do we get to that 94 and then that 95? So with Pfizer study, how we got to that 95% is 8 individuals were infected with COVID-19 in the vaccination group versus 165 in that group that was not vaccinated. In comparison to the Moderna study, in which 11 individuals were infected with COVID-19 versus 185 or 182 that were not. So that's how we get our 94.1% efficacy from Moderna. So when we look at the individuals in the vaccination groups that were actually infected, there were 8 individuals in the Pfizer group after they received the vaccine, and there were 11 in the Moderna group after they received the vaccine. So when we look at the actual people infected, 8 versus 11 is very mild in comparison, right? So that's the difference of 3 individuals that developed COVID-19. But I even go a bit further than this. And I think about the individuals that develop severe COVID-19, because we know that although these vaccines are 94% and 94% and 95% effective, that you can still get COVID-19 despite having been vaccinated. So I look at severe COVID-19 because I know that if someone has severe COVID-19, then that's really bad. That's when you end up on the ventilator. That's when you end up dying from this virus. And in the Pfizer study, there was 1 individual that developed severe COVID-19. However, this person did not pass away. And in the Moderna study, there were 0. So we see very minor differences between these 2 vaccines as far as the clinical studies are concerned. So I would have been comfortable receiving either one of the vaccines. The reason that I was rooting for getting Moderna was for personal reasons. I am just a big fan of Black scientists and Black women scientists, as I am a bench researcher like Dr. Kismeki Corbett myself. So that was my own personal reason, just for Black girl magic purposes. But in terms of the actual vaccine and how well it would have worked, and if I would have felt protected, I would have felt protected by either one. Kind of the same when I think about Johnson & Johnson. I then think about the fact that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has actually been tested during these clinical studies against these variants and against these resistant strains. So they've accounted for the resistance or the mutations. They've accounted for that in the studies. And 2, those individuals did not have individuals develop severe COVID-19, as far as we know. I still haven't seen, the FDA documents yet, so I won't boldly make that statement. But as far as what I have seen, they did not see severe COVID-19 cases, and they did not see deaths due to COVID-19. So in my personal opinion, I would feel safe getting either of these vaccines because I know that I have the potential of being protected far more so than I would have should I not be vaccinated at all. That's all that I have on that. I don't know if anybody else has anything, and then we can round it out.
Yeah, not really much. Maybe age. If you're, 16, 17, you clearly would have to go with the Pfizer one. But other than that, no.
I'm partial to Moderna because there was a Black girl involved in it, and she went to UMBC, which is where I went to for undergrad. So I'm partial to it just because of that. But it's nothing scientific. It's just fangirl and super proud of her that she was involved in this. And added on top of that, the mRNA technology, I think, is scientific genius, period. Whether Pfizer or Moderna, it is scientific genius. And I think it's unfortunate that they haven't gotten their crowns yet.
I am with you 110%.
I would say I'm a proponent of access to healthcare. So whichever vaccine you have access to, then that's the one that I would recommend for you.
Yep,
I
absolutely.
think another quick thing to think about is just what vaccines that these clinics would actually have access to. The Pfizer vaccine has to be stored in like minus 90 something degrees Fahrenheit. So if your clinic, doctor's office doesn't have that capability, they might only be able to get the Moderna vaccine. So you may be limited.
All right, so I am going to thank you all for attending tonight's presentation of the COVID-19 information. And it was my honor and my pleasure to be able to be joined here and to talk with my actual real life girlfriends who I talked to about ID topics in normal life. So it was great to be able to talk on this big screen about it. We hope that we were able to answer you all's questions in regard to the vaccine. We hope that we have promoted just you all, if not getting the vaccine, we hope that which we hope you do, but we hope that we have equipped you all with knowledge so that you can successfully navigate that vaccination process for yourselves. So thank you. I wish you all a great and blessed rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.